The evening sky stretched endlessly above David and Emily, a canvas of twinkling stars casting their glow on the quiet meadow. They sat at a small table, surrounded by the soft hum of nature, far from the chaotic world. It was a rare moment of peace in their otherwise hectic lives. David, once a soldier who had seen too much violence, now found solace in these fleeting moments with Emily. She was his anchor, the person who made him feel human again. The candlelight flickered softly between them, casting gentle shadows across their faces. Emily, with her bright eyes and radiant smile, laughed at something David had said, her voice a melody that seemed to erase all the darkness that had followed him from his past. They had been together for a few years now, their relationship built on mutual respect, love, and a shared understanding of the world. David couldn't help but think about how lucky he was. After all, his life had been anything but normal. He had been a soldier, one of the best, but it wasn't the life he wanted anymore. His past, filled with combat and bloodshed, haunted him. He had left the military to find peace, to be with Emily, to live a life away from war. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they finished their meal, the world around them seemed to freeze in a strange stillness. The peaceful night sky, once so comforting, now felt too quiet. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A bright light cut through the sky like a slashing blade. The air vibrated with a strange hum that made David's instincts flare. He barely had time to process what was happening when the ground trembled beneath them. A fleet of alien ships, sleek and menacing, descended from the sky, blocking out the stars. Their shapes were unfamiliar, sharp, angular, and foreboding. They glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. The fleet was not just a few ships. It was a whole armada, each one larger than any craft David had ever seen. The moment the first ship touched down, a flash of intense light enveloped them. David barely had time to react as Emily was pulled into the air, her body rising from the ground, as if she was weightless. He reached out in a desperate attempt to grab her, but the force of the light was too strong, and within seconds, she was gone, disappeared. David's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation hit him like a sledgehammer. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what he had just seen. His mind raced. How could this be happening? Who were these beings? Why Emily? The sound of the alien ships powering up brought him back to the present. David snapped into action, running toward the nearest ship. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that had once kept him alive in countless battles. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, it wasn't a mission, it was personal. He tried to make sense of the situation, to understand what he was up against. His eyes searched the sky, looking for any signs of the enemy, but all he could see was the chaotic descent of more alien ships. They were here. They had come for a reason. But what reason could they have for taking Emily? She was just a civilian, a human. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, cold voice coming from above. It wasn't human, but it was clear enough to understand. The voice, robotic and emotionless, declared, "The subject has been acquired. Prepare for transport." David's blood ran cold. Emily was already aboard one of the ships. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the nearest building, the one that housed his hidden stash of military equipment. He had once been part of a special unit, one of the government's best-kept secrets. He had trained with the most advanced technology, learned combat tactics that were designed to take down the most formidable foes. But he had left that life behind. Until now. As he reached the hidden compartment, David's fingers trembled as he unlocked the stash. Inside, he found the weapons and gear he hadn't touched in years. His tactical armor, energy blades, and his old combat suit. He grabbed everything with urgency, knowing that the clock was ticking. Emily needed him, and he wouldn't let her down. While he suited up, memories of his past flooded his mind. His training had been brutal, designed to break him and rebuild him into a weapon. He had fought in wars, faced enemies that were far more advanced than humans could imagine. But it wasn't just the combat that haunted him. It was the losses, the comrades he had lost along the way. People who had been there, fighting by his side, but were now nothing more than echoes in his mind. And now, Emily was at risk of becoming another lost soul. The words hung in the air like a strange, foreign concept. She had never expected this. She had thought all humans were the same, brutal, savage. But here was one, standing in front of her, offering her care and compassion instead of pain. She didn't know what to make of it. Was this just a tactic, a way to break her spirit before her execution? Or was this soldier truly different from the rest of his kind? Her mind raced, trying to process the confusion swirling inside her. Could this really be happening? Was it possible that a human soldier, a killer in the eyes of her people, could offer her kindness? As the soldier continued tending to her, the princess couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Could the stories she had been told about humans be wrong? Was there more to them than she had been led to believe? She found herself looking at him, not as an enemy, but as someone different, someone she couldn't understand. The silence between them grew, but it was no longer uncomfortable. There was a strange, quiet understanding in the air. She didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment, she realized something profound. Not all humans were the monsters she had been taught to fear. There was more to them than just the stories. And perhaps, just perhaps, the soldier standing before her was proof of that. As the door to the cell slid closed behind him, leaving her alone once more, the princess was left with a single thought, a thought that would change everything. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. She had just encountered a human unlike any she had ever imagined. Days passed since the human soldier's unexpected act of kindness, and with each new day, the princess found herself more and more puzzled by him. She had been prepared for cruelty, for violence, for the kind of brutality her people had always associated with humans. Yet here she was, in a cold cell, with nothing but silence and her thoughts. And still, that soldier's actions lingered in her mind, refusing to be forgotten. The princess had always been taught that humans were heartless creatures, merciless killers who destroyed anything they couldn't control. But this soldier, this man who attended to her wounds with such care, didn't fit the image she had been raised to believe in. She had to know more, but the opportunity to speak to him never seemed to come. The guards who watched over her were silent and cold, only delivering her food and water, never saying a word. No one came to visit her except for him. And when he did, it was always when the rest of the camp was asleep, when the world seemed to pause around them. One night, as the moonlight spilled into the room through the small barred window, she heard the familiar footsteps again, heavy, purposeful, and unmistakably human. Her heart beat a little faster in her chest as she realized who it was. He was here again, the soldier who had been so different from the rest. The princess braced herself, her mind racing with questions. Why was he coming back? Was he here to finish the job? Or perhaps was it something else? Her instincts told her to stay alert, but curiosity gnawed at her. The door to her cell creaked open quietly, and once again the soldier stepped inside. This time, however, there was a different air about him. His posture was still firm, his movements still measured, but there was something in his eyes, a distant look, like he was carrying a weight much heavier than what he showed. He wasn't here for battle, for violence, or even to continue what they had started. He was simply here, as if his presence alone meant something more than words could express. He didn't speak at first, only looked at her with a quiet understanding, as if searching for something in her expression. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. The princess, though she was filled with questions, held them all back. Something about the silence felt different this time, as if the air between them was thick with secrets, secrets that neither of them could yet share. Finally, it was the soldier who broke the silence. "You've been asking questions," he said softly, his voice low and tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. "I can see it in your eyes." The princess was stunned. How could he know? She had barely spoken to him at all since their first encounter, but there was no mistaking the truth in his words. He could see right through her, and for the first time, she felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. Vulnerable not because she was a prisoner, but because the human soldier, this man who was supposed to be her enemy, seemed to understand her in a way that no one else ever had. She didn't know what to say, but her curiosity couldn't be contained anymore. "Why do you help me?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. "Why not just let me die like the others?" As Elias moved closer to the Sarvok soldier, he could hear the soft, mechanical hum of their cloaking devices, the subtle sound of their technology working to hide their movements. But Elias was ready. He had been trained for moments like this, where stealth and surprise were the only tools available. His hand tightened around the grip of his blaster, the cold metal offering a sense of purpose. In a swift motion, Elias pulled himself up from behind the wall and fired. The blast rang out, the energy bolt striking the Sarvok soldier in the chest. The force of the shot sent the massive creature stumbling backward, its heavy armor sparking as it fell. But it didn't go down without a fight. The other Sarvok soldiers nearby snapped to attention, their eyes glowing red beneath their helmets. They raised their weapons, aiming at Elias with deadly precision. Elias didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, rolling into cover behind a pile of debris. The air was filled with the sound of blaster fire, the crackling energy bolts zipping past him. He could feel the heat of the blasts as they grazed the air around him. But he kept moving, his body trained for moments like this. The Sarvok soldiers were relentless. They didn't stop. They didn't hesitate. But Elias wasn't about to give up. He had a reason to fight now, something more than just the survival of the colony. He had a purpose. He had to make them pay. As the battle raged on, Elias felt a strange sense of clarity. The war that had never been had now begun. The Sarvok had invaded, thinking they could conquer this world without resistance. They had thought humanity was weak, divided, easy to crush. But Elias knew better. Humanity might be broken, scattered, and vulnerable, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. And the Sarvok were about to find out just how wrong they were. In the chaos of the fight, Elias found himself surrounded by a handful of survivors, men and women who had managed to escape the first wave of the invasion. They were a mix of civilians and former soldiers, all of them scared and desperate. But as Elias turned to them, his voice steady, his eyes burning with determination, he saw something shift in their expressions. Fear was replaced with resolve. "We fight together," Elias said, his voice carrying across the small group. "We've lost everything today, but we haven't lost our will to fight. This is our home, and we will make them regret coming here." The survivors nodded, some of them still trembling, but all of them willing to take up arms. Elias knew they were no match for the power of the Sarvok army, but there was something they had that the invaders didn't. Heart. And heart could do things that technology and weapons couldn't. The battle continued as Elias and his ragtag group fought their way through the remains of the colony. Every corner turned, every firefight fought, brought them closer to the heart of the Sarvok invasion force. And with every step, Elias could feel the anger building inside him. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for his son, for the countless lives lost in this senseless attack. He was fighting for revenge, and he wasn't alone. The Sarvok would soon learn that humanity might have been silent for too long, but now they had awakened. The war that had never been was here, and it would be one the invaders would never forget. The deeper Elias and his small group pushed into the enemy's territory, the more the destruction around them grew. The colony, once filled with the hum of everyday life, was now a graveyard of twisted metal and burnt-out buildings. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant cries of those still trapped echoed in the night. Yet Elias didn't stop. His legs ached, his body screamed for rest, but he kept moving. Every step was another reminder of what the Xarvok had done, what they had taken. His group was small, just a handful of survivors. They were untrained, just ordinary people trying to survive, but Elias could see the fire in their eyes. They were fighting not just for survival, but for revenge. Each of them had lost someone, a friend, a family member, a child. They didn't know it yet, but they were becoming soldiers. They were becoming a force that Xarvok would have to reckon with. The heart of the Xarvok invasion force was still ahead. Elias knew that if they could get to it, they could strike a crippling blow. The Xarvok had set up a large command center at the center of the colony, heavily fortified and protected by layers of advanced technology. If they could destroy it, they could send a message that humanity wasn't going to roll over. Not anymore. Meanwhile, the resistance on Earth was starting to make its move. The military, under enormous pressure, launched its first counterattack. They had reverse-engineered some of the alien technology, including the artifact, and designed new AI disruptor weapons. The plan was to use these disruptors to scramble the Xinthur's communication network, buying humanity some time to regroup and strategize. It was humanity's first real hope of turning the tide of war. The first strike came on Mars. Human soldiers, equipped with newly developed AI disruptors, landed under the cover of darkness, hoping to catch the Xinthar off guard. The battle was fierce. Orbital bombardments rained down from above, scorching the red surface of the planet, while ground forces fought to secure key locations. Soldiers, armed with heavy weaponry, moved swiftly across the Martian landscape, taking cover behind craters and broken structures. The Xinthar, though powerful, were not invincible. Their war machines, A-controlled and relentless, had weaknesses. The human forces aimed to exploit those weaknesses, launching a coordinated assault. As the battle raged on, Bonner was leading a special ops team on a critical mission, infiltrating the Xinthur's communication network and using the artifact to hack into their systems. The Resistance's success depended on this mission. If they could disrupt the Xinthar's ability to coordinate their forces, humanity might have a chance to regroup and strike back with greater force. The team knew the stakes were high, but Bonner was determined. The mission was supposed to be a stealth operation, quick, clean, and precise. However, as the team approached the Xinthur's command center, everything went wrong. The Xinthar had anticipated their movements. It was a trap. The team was met with overwhelming resistance as Xinthar war machines ambushed them from all directions. The air was thick with gunfire, the crack of energy blasts filling the air. Human soldiers fought back, using every weapon and tactic they had learned. But the Xinthar were relentless. They adapted quickly, and soon the battle was no longer in humanity's favor. In the chaos of the firefight, Bonner's team found themselves cornered. They were pinned down by a relentless barrage of energy blasts. The sound of explosions was deafening, and the ground beneath their feet shook with the force of the impacts. The team's only hope was to complete their mission, to use the artifact to break through the Xinthur's communication network. But the mission was slipping further out of reach with each passing second. It was in this moment of crisis that Lieutenant Alden, one of Bonner's most trusted comrades, made a decision that would change everything. Seeing that Bonner and the others were surrounded, he made the ultimate sacrifice. He charged at a group of Xinthar war machines, drawing their fire away from the team. His sacrifice bought Bonner and the others just enough time to reach the control room and use the artifact to hack into the Xinthar's communication systems. But as the artifact activated, something went horribly wrong. The energy from the artifact surged through the system, overloading it and causing a massive explosion. Bonner was thrown to the ground, her vision blurred, and her ears ringing from the blast. When the dust cleared, Alden was gone. His body was nowhere to be found, his sacrifice having given them the opening they needed, but at the cost of his life. The emotional weight of his death hit Bonner hard. She had known Alden for years, and to lose him in such a selfless way left a hole in her heart. The human cost of this war was becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight where every victory came at a price. But Bonner knew that Alden's sacrifice couldn't be in vain. The artifact had worked, and the Zinthor's communication network was now disrupted. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give humanity hope. As the team retreated, the Resistance's momentum started to build. They now had a chance to turn the tide, but they also knew that the Zinthor would stop at nothing to crush them. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun, and Bonner would carry Alden's memory with her as a driving force to push forward, no matter the cost. After years of battling the Zinthor Collective, humanity was finally starting to turn the tide. The discovery of the alien artifact and the efforts to reverse engineer its technology had opened up a new path for humanity's resistance. With the artifact's power, Earth's forces managed to develop a groundbreaking weapon designed to disrupt the Zinthor Eye. This weapon, when activated, created an energy pulse that scrambled the Zinthor systems, causing confusion and disarray among their forces. The first major test of the weapon came during a daring raid on a Zinthor fleet stationed near Mars. Bonner, leading a squad of elite soldiers, launched a surprise assault. The weapon worked perfectly, taking out several Zinthor warships in a single strike. The human forces cheered in triumph as the alien fleet was thrown into chaos, with warships exploding in the vacuum of space and the once imposing force beginning to retreat. It was a massive victory for humanity. For the first time in the war, the Zinthor had been dealt a blow they couldn't easily recover from. The resistance forces saw it as a turning point, a sign that humanity was capable of standing up to this unstoppable enemy. However, this success came with a terrifying realization. The artifact's power was not as stable as they had hoped. The weapon, powered by the artifact, had begun to malfunction. The energy pulse it emitted was unstable, and every use of the weapon caused it to grow more unpredictable. At first, the instability seemed like a minor issue, something that could be fixed with time. But as the weapon was used more, its instability grew more dangerous. The pulse it emitted began to cause more damage than intended, affecting the very systems humanity had hoped to protect. Ships in orbit, cities on Earth, and even the soldiers using the weapon were at risk of being caught in its destructive wake. The artifact's power, once seen as humanity's salvation, now posed a threat to its very existence. Bonner and the engineers working on the artifact's weaponized form quickly realized the consequences of continuing to use it without fixing the instability. The weapon was volatile, and they could no longer guarantee that it wouldn't spiral out of control. If they didn't find a way to stabilize it, the artifact's power could destroy everything humanity had worked so hard to build. As the weapon's instability grew, the Zinthor made their move. They were not the kind of enemies to retreat in the face of one defeat. The Zinthor responded to the human strike by launching a full-scale invasion. Their massive warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen, were headed straight for Earth. It was the beginning of the end. Humanity's last stand against an enemy that had already destroyed so much. The Zinthor warships appeared in Earth's skies like an unstoppable storm, blotting out the sun as they descended toward the planet. Earth's forces scrambled to prepare, knowing that this was their final chance to fight back. The weapon, unstable and unpredictable as it was, could still be their only hope, but using it again meant risking everything. If they activated it in its current state, they might save Earth from destruction, but they could also doom themselves in the process. As the Zinthor's fleet loomed closer, Bonner found herself standing at the heart of the conflict. The fate of humanity rested on her shoulders. She had led her forces through countless battles, and now, as Earth's last line of defense, she was faced with an impossible choice. The weapon could destroy the Zinthor's command ship and possibly turn the tide of the invasion. But if she fired the weapon again, there was a very real chance it would backfire, not just wiping out the Zinthor, but also all of humanity's last remaining hope. In the midst of this chaos, Bonner received word that the Zinthar command ship was within range. This was it. There would be no more chances after this. She stood in the control room, staring at the display of the unstable weapon, her hand hovering over the launch button. Her mind raced as she thought of all the lives lost, of Alden's sacrifice, of the countless soldiers who had given everything to fight for humanity's future. Was it worth risking it all? Was the weapon worth the destruction it might bring? With the Zinthar fleet closing in, the moment of decision came. Bonner could use the weapon, hope that it would strike the Zinthar's command ship and destroy their fleet, or she could retreat and preserve humanity's chance at survival, knowing that without a counterattack, the Zinthar would wipe them out completely. It was a choice no leader should ever have to make. Her mind flashed back to the battlefield on Kepler, to the discovery of the alien ruins, to the artifact's promise. Humanity had reached for the stars, and now they were being pulled back to the darkness. But Bonner couldn't stand by and watch Earth fall without taking a chance. She had always believed that humanity's spirit would carry them through, no matter the odds. And if this was the final chance, she would not hesitate. With a deep breath, she slammed her hand down on the launch button. The weapon activated, sending a surge of energy through the Zinthar fleet. The command ship took the brunt of the attack, its system scrambling as the pulse of energy tore through its defenses. But as the blast expanded, Bonner realized with horror that the weapon was beginning to destabilize once again. The very ground beneath her shook as the power from the artifact grew dangerously volatile. She had made her choice. Now there was no turning back. The weapon had worked, but at what cost? Bonner could only watch in shock and awe as the Zinthar's massive warships began to crumble, their once imposing might reduced to rubble by humanity's final stand. But the artifact's power had come at a terrible price. The energy blast was expanding rapidly, and if it wasn't contained, it would consume everything in its path. Bonner stood at the heart of humanity's counterattack, torn between the victory she had just won and the devastation that might follow. In the end, her sacrifice, and the sacrifices of those who fought alongside her, would determine whether humanity survived this war or became another footnote in the Zinthar's endless conquest. The final battle had begun. Above Earth's atmosphere, humanity's last line of defense stood in stark contrast to the enormous Zinthar fleet. Their massive warships glided silently through space, waiting for the signal to launch their final assault. Earth's defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, had one chance left, one final strike to end the war. Bonner and a small team of soldiers had been tasked with infiltrating the heart of the Zinthar fleet. They were headed straight for the core of their command center, where the weapon they had developed, powered by the unstable alien artifact, would be delivered. There was no time to waste. The artifact's energy had grown dangerously volatile, and the countdown to the final detonation had already started. Every second that passed was another second closer to either victory or total annihilation. The team moved quickly, maneuvering through the darkened expanse of space. The Zinthar fleet, enormous and intimidating, loomed in front of them. As the team neared their target, Bonner felt the weight of the mission pressing down on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. She knew what was at stake: humanity's survival, the future of the human race. The artifact, unstable as it was, had to reach its destination, and it had to be activated before it completely lost control. Infiltrating the Zinthar fleet wasn't easy. The team had to use all their training, their stealth, and their courage. They drifted silently in the void, cloaked in the shadows of the enemy ships. Their movements were swift and calculated, with Bonner leading the charge. The Zinthar fleet was vast, but it wasn't invulnerable. There were weak spots, and Bonner's team knew how to exploit them. They attacked quickly and efficiently, taking down Zinthar sentries and bypassing security measures with precision. As they approached the heart of the fleet, the tension was unbearable. The team's nerves were on edge, knowing that every move could be their last. Suddenly, alarms blared through the Zinthar warships. The fleet had detected their presence. A wave of Zinthar soldiers descended upon them, and the battle began in earnest. The action was fast and furious. Gunfire, explosions, and flashes of energy filled the void of space as the two sides clashed. The team fought with everything they had. Zero-gravity combat was disorienting and chaotic, but Bonner and her team adapted quickly. Each soldier was an expert in the art of space combat, and they moved with deadly efficiency. Blasters fired, grenades exploded, and the sounds of battle echoed through the ships. Every strike from the Zinthar was met with resistance, but the human team pressed on, knowing that failure was not an option. Amid the chaos, Bonner pushed forward, determined to reach the core of the fleet. She could feel the artifact's energy growing more unstable with each passing moment. It pulsed and crackled with an eerie glow, warning her that time was running out. She glanced at her team, seeing the fear and determination in their eyes. They knew the risks, but they trusted her to lead them to victory. Finally, they reached the Zinthar Command Center. The room was vast and imposing, filled with strange alien technology. The heart of the enemy fleet, the source of their power, was before them. Bonner approached the core, and the team set to work on placing the weapon. The artifact had to be implanted into the center of the Zinthar's technology, and then, once it was activated, it would trigger a chain reaction that would destroy the entire fleet. But there was a catch. The artifact's instability had reached a point where it could not be safely deactivated once activated. The energy pulse would trigger a massive explosion, one that would consume the entire Zinthar fleet. Bonner realized that the only way to ensure the weapon's detonation was to stay behind and make sure it went off. Her team hesitated, but Bonner knew what needed to be done. "I'll stay," she said firmly. "I'll make sure it works. You need to get out of here now." There was no time to argue. The clock was ticking. Bonner quickly activated the artifact, and the core of the Zinthar fleet began to hum with power. The energy was building, rising in intensity. The team members, knowing what Bonner was about to do, exchanged glances filled with sorrow and understanding. They wanted to stay, to fight alongside her, but Bonner's decision was final. "Go," she ordered, her voice steady despite the turmoil around them. "Make sure humanity survives." With heavy hearts, the team retreated, knowing they would never see Bonner again. As they made their way out, Bonner stayed behind, standing alone in the heart of the enemy fleet. The artifact's power surged, and Bonner braced herself for the final moments. The countdown had begun, and there was no way to stop it. With a final look at the approaching destruction, Bonner whispered to herself, "For humanity, for Earth." And then, in a brilliant flash of light, the artifact detonated. The energy pulse exploded outward, tearing through the Zinthar fleet with devastating force. The warships disintegrated, their massive forms reduced to nothing in the wake of the explosion. The Zinthar, once so powerful, were wiped out in an instant. The survivors watched in awe as the Zinthar fleet vanished in a blaze of destruction. The weapon had worked, but at a terrible cost. Bonner had given her life to ensure that humanity would have a future. Her sacrifice had made the difference, and the Zinthar were no more. On Earth, the news of the victory spread quickly. Humanity had won. The Zinthar were gone, and the war was over. But the joy of victory was tempered by the deep sorrow of losing Bonner. Her sacrifice would forever be remembered as the moment when humanity stood strong in the face of impossible odds. Bonner's final words, "For humanity, for Earth," became a rallying cry, a symbol of the resilience and courage that defined humanity. Her death was not in vain. The human race had survived, and it would continue to reach for the stars, just as Bonner had always believed. As the survivors looked up at the sky, they knew that Bonner's sacrifice would never be forgotten. The Zinthar had been defeated, but the spirit of humanity, forged in the fires of war, would live on forever. The victory was hard-won. The Zinthar had been defeated, but the cost was staggering. Humanity, once proud and powerful, now found itself scattered and broken, with most of its colonies lying in ruins. Cities that had once thrived on Mars, Europa, and Kepler were nothing more than smoldering ashes. The Xinthar's relentless assault had destroyed much, leaving behind only the remnants of a once great civilization. Survivors were few, and the sense of loss hung heavy over the human race. Entire families had been wiped out, entire cities reduced to dust. The war had taken its toll, not just in lives, but in the very spirit of humanity. The battle had been fought, and the Xinthar were no more, but at what cost? There was no celebration, no joy, only the heavy burden of rebuilding and the scars of war. But even in the face of such devastation, there was something more powerful than sorrow: resilience. Humanity had endured. Despite the overwhelming odds, they had fought back, driven by the will to survive and the need to protect their future. Bonner's sacrifice had made it possible for the human race to continue, and it had inspired a new sense of unity among the survivors. The world, though broken, had not given up. As the survivors began the long, arduous task of rebuilding, there was a realization that humanity's future would not be the same. The old ways of expansion, of blindly reaching for the stars, could no longer be the way forward. The Xinthar had shown them the dangers of unchecked ambition, the cost of overreaching into the unknown. Humanity could not continue its rapid expansion without understanding the risks that came with it. The galaxy was vast, and there were forces out there that could destroy them if they were not careful. Yet there was also hope, hope in the face of destruction. Hope that humanity could rise from the ashes, stronger and wiser than before. The survivors knew that the fight against the Xinthar had been a turning point, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new era, a time to rebuild, to grow, and to explore once more. But this time, they would do so with caution, with respect for the dangers that lay in the unknown. The answer came to him, slowly but surely. They didn't have to defeat the Zorath head-on. What they needed was an army, allies, resources. Humanity had always been underestimated, but that was their advantage. The Zorath thought they could break the human spirit, but they hadn't reckoned with the indomitable will of one man, Riker, and the soldiers who followed him. The station finally appeared on the horizon, a small but functional outpost, floating like a forgotten relic in the emptiness of space. Riker could feel his pulse quicken as they drew closer. This could be their chance. This could be the turning point they so desperately needed. The pod docked with the station, the quiet thrum of the engines signaling their arrival. Jensen was the first to stand, grabbing his equipment and preparing to disembark. "We're here," he said, his voice full of anticipation. Riker nodded, feeling the weight of their situation settle over him once more. "Let's see what we can find." Bonner stirred again, groaning as he pushed himself to his feet. He looked at Riker, a determination in his eyes that mirrored the captain's own. They had made it this far, but the true test of their will was only just beginning. The airlock hissed open, and the trio stepped out into the station. The cold, sterile environment greeted them, a stark contrast to the warmth of their home planet. But this was the beginning of something new. They were alive, and they were ready to fight back. Humanity had always been underestimated, and that had been their strength. Now, it was time to show the galaxy just how strong they could be. The Zorath Empire had only just begun to realize that the last human soldier was still standing. And with his team, they would rise again. This was just the beginning.